Let's look at a video about how God is love.
God sending people to hell is love. Pretty much all modern heresy starts with the question, would a loving God blank? Would a loving God send someone to hell? And Francis Chan said once, we can't ask ourselves, would a loving God do X, Y, and Z? Because that question submits God's character to our human definition of love. He said, in order to appropriately understand love, we have to understand that the Bible says God is love. Therefore, whatever God does defines what love is. God sending people to hell is love.
Now, at first glance, this is just the dumbest thing you've ever heard, right? And the confidence with which he says the dumbest thing you've ever heard is just jarring. But what I want people to see more of and understand more of is what he's doing at a deeper level. Because just calling this man-child an idiot is just surface level. His brain is actually being incredibly efficient. His brain is cutting out so much unnecessary labor. And I want to see the he made one move theologically, but he did 5 or 6 things psychologically that reduced the amount of work his brain has to do. So the first thing that he did is he's collapsing moral complexity into this single variable. So instead of evaluating actions case by case or evaluating the Bible case by case, is this just, is this proportional, is this humane? The brain is just using a shortcut. The premise is God equals love. Therefore, anything God does equals love. And what this does is completely eliminates any ethical deliberation, moral ambiguity, proportionality questions, and the brain really prefers this low-cost moral computation. And with that move, the brain just cut down on thousands of hours of moral work to examine the ethics of all the complexities of life and also all of the ethical complexities and implications of the Bible. And so rather than just saying like he's stupid, what we should say is his brain just cut down on thousands of hours of work, and that is an efficient thing for a brain to do, right? Like I think that's a more accurate way of describing the psychology going on here. So the second thing that he did is he really reduced cognitive dissonance without having to change beliefs, because there is this massive cognitive distance between number 1, God is loving, and number 2, God eternally tortures people, right? Like those are 2 pretty dissonant statements. And so rather than having to go through again all the work and the mental effort to revise one of those beliefs so that they fit together better, he just kind of relabels that torture equals love, punishment equals mercy, violence equals justice. And this is classic cognitive dissonance reduction via reinterpretation. And again, it's cheaper as far as brain and energy to do that rather than question the system that he is benefiting from. This is safer than doubting God and the hundreds of implications that would mean for his life, his community, his identity, his morality, his meaning, his purpose. Existential crisis, by the way, is an incredible amount of brain work. So his brain is staying away from all of those implications by just saying, by just putting these statements together, because everything God does is loving, then God throwing people in hell forever also is love. And he's collapsing that cognitive dissonance, which gives him just a lot of psychological safety and ease. The third thing that he does is that he's holding on to his primary attachment parent. This is one that I didn't see earlier on in my theological studies and the cognitive science of religion, but it's one that I'm starting to pay attention to more, where God is functioning as your primary parent, as your primary attachment figure, and threatening that figure produces anxiety similar to relational loss. And so reframing harm as love preserves his attachment bond to his primary parent, and it avoids existential abandonment, and it keeps the caregiver as good, because the brain will do a lot more to reinterpret reality before it will risk losing its attachment anchor. This is the exact same thing that children will do when they have an abusive parent. They will excuse the issues of the abusive parent because psychologically, it's actually more destabilizing to say that your caregiver is problematic than it is to reinterpret reality. Because primally, if you're dependent on a primary caregiver and that caregiver is abusive, like throwing everyone in hell, psychologically, it's easier to make God good and not abusive than to have to accept that you don't have a heavenly caregiver at all, or that your heavenly caregiver is abusive, because that feels very vulnerable, just like a child. A child can't reject an abusive parent sometimes outright because they are dependent on that caregiver for resources, which forces the brain to see the abusive parent as love somehow, because that's actually going to feel more psychologically safe than being dependent on a caregiver that actually sucks. And it's this weird thing that the brain will do. It will reconfigure reality before it will question the caregiver that you have an attachment bond to. So the number 4 thing that his brain is doing, and we see this in all kinds of religion and is really the basis of so many of our religious behaviors, is maintaining in-group, out-group clarity. And the cognitive science of religion shows that religion stabilize by rewarding in-group conformity and moralizing the punishment of out-groups. And so hell as love allows extreme punishment without kind of any guilt around that, and boundary enforcement without any shame. It keeps that system of who's in and who's out intact, that those inside my camp are loved correctly and those outside experience pain, but it's justifiable. And this is very stable group. This is a stable group maintenance mechanism. It keeps him feeling safe that he's in the in-group. And there's a deep biological urge there. And this is why when I left Mormonism, for example, even though I had no threat on my life, it truly felt like I was dying, because getting kicked out of your in-group thousands of years ago really did mean death. And so when you get kicked out of your in-group today, even though you don't die, you'll often get this kind of warning from inside that it feels very scary. It feels like death. And so by doing this God is love thing, even hell, God is love, he just improved the borders between the safety of his in-group and the legitimacy of other people being in the out-group. And that makes him feel like a safe little boy at home. And it's a deep primal instinct. The number 5 thing that he did is he's just avoiding empathy overload. Fully empathizing with eternal suffering is brain work, and empathy takes a huge amount of brain work. We know this. We have so many studies on this. We know, for example, from the Hungry Judge study that when you're low in blood sugar, your brain reduces this very costly task of empathizing and putting ourselves in other shoes, which is why you're more likely to be denied parole if the judge was hungry. So the mind, his brain is dampening empathy by reframing suffering as deserved, or pain as corrective, or victims as resisting love. And this protects the believer from having to do so much empathy work on, hey, is it fair that they're kind of like struggling out there in hell forever? You don't have to think that, because the cost of empathy for a brain is very high. Reframing is cheaper. It's another move his brain did to reduce the amount of work it has to do. It's an energy shortcut. And so what people, and I think what especially atheists will do, especially atheists like me who became atheists because we went to theology school, is sometimes we get caught up arguing theology with people like this through apologetics, through theology, through Bible verses, and none of that is actually the point. What's really driving this behavior is not how he reads the Bible or his hermeneutic approach. The reality is, for some reason, he's a very scared little boy. He is psychologically not able or really resistant to handling a high level of complexity. And this is a brain, for whatever reason, I couldn't tell you, I don't know his backstory, but this is a brain that vastly prefers shortcuts compared to work. Now, that could be because of a personality type. Some personalities really don't like cognitive dissonance and have a high need for closure. We do know for people who tend towards fundamentalism that psychologically they have a higher need for closure. It could be because of trauma and fear of chaos, which makes you cling to certainty. It could be fear-driven, fear of death, fear of meaninglessness. It could be because he benefits so much socially from being a Christian man. But for whatever reason, this brain has been incentivized to take shortcuts that don't require the brain to have to do any work at all. And that's not really that stupid. Like, it's like if I find as a way as an employee to get paid without doing much work by taking shortcuts, it's not that stupid to take advantage of that. That's what his brain is doing. It took every shortcut it could to cut down on ambiguity, on complexity, on empathy. It makes him feel very safe with a primary caregiver and socially very safe with an in-group. So this brain is very happy to stay in this blackened world place that makes it feel very safe. And this is why he is so averse to letting in any kind of complexity. And I don't know what is driving that behavior, but there's a deeper reason that is driving that behavior, deeper than just how he's reading the Bible. And that's what's going on underneath this theological discussion that they think that they're having. So if I were to talk to this guy, which he would never watch this video, it would be such a deep attack to your psyche that your ego would never allow. An ego would protect a brain from having to listen to all that. But if I were to talk to this guy, or if I wanted to help him make some room for some gray here so that we could calm down this hell rhetoric, I wouldn't do theology first. I would dig more into his backstory and try to give him some more tools for psychological stability that would allow him to consider thoughts that for him right now are apparently too overwhelming or require too much energy or are too destabilizing. And so good psychological support is actually how a person like this would be able to let go of his very black and white way of thinking.